Welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. What is the customer of the future? And do you have the kind of customer experience that consumers expect from brands like Amazon and Sephora and others who are designing seamless and frictionless experiences? After all, what do you expect as a consumer yourself? Maybe they have some sort of access today to the special tools and technology and people that are required, right? Or maybe it's a mindset and a culture shift that will not only impact your CX, but also your sales, lead gen, growth, churn, employee engagement, and a lot more for the future. Blake Morgan is a customer experience futurist, a keynote speaker, and the author of 2 books, including The Customer of the Future, 10 Guiding Principles for Winning Tomorrow's Business. And on this episode, we'll discuss CX, zero friction and seamless experience, leveraging technology and data in a human way, what the customer of the future is, as well as what the company of the future is, third parties that touch your customers, Amazon, Sephora, show notes, shark metaphors, and a lot more. So let's tune in to an expert in customer experience with an expert in the shark experience on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. All right, Blake, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would, please tell us a little bit about your career to date with the focus you've got today.
Hey, Kenneth. I love that you also go by Shark, which is pretty awesome.
Thank you.
And I love wildlife myself, so maybe on another podcast we can just talk about wildlife.
There you go.
But yeah, you don't want me to hear me talk about sharks. No, I've been in customer experience for over 12 years, and I fell into this really by accident. Some of the best things in life happen by accident, and I had moved to New York City to pursue a dream in journalism, but that didn't work out, and was recruited off one of those websites like Yahoo Jobs, and ended up, after 5 years working for a conference company, helping to move them online and being an online brand when that really wasn't a thing. It was 2006, and I was the face of this online community. I had a podcast in 2008 about customer management. So that was a while back. I met my husband at a CRM conference, of all things, customer relationship management.
Wow.
I was sick of the sharks in New York, all the guys there. So met Jacob and moved to San Francisco, because I know when I catch a big fish and it's a good one, I'm going to reel it in. So I moved to San Francisco to be with him. Okay, no more like sharks or fish metaphors, I promise.
It's okay by me. They know me. So.
Oh, okay, cool. So I moved to be with Jacob, but I really floundered a few years. And I was known online for talking about customer management, something a lot of people didn't really care about except for maybe 10 analysts and then Zappos, the shoe commerce company. But I struggled a few years. I took all these startup jobs, and a lot of them didn't work out. I ended up working for Intel, the chip maker, as a customer service executive. But I always wanted to focus on thought leadership and content, because for me, that was always my strength. Being a practitioner was really eye-opening, but that wasn't my strength. My strength was being part of this dialogue, helping to shape this category of customer experience. And the past 4 years or 4.5 years, I've been on the stage speaking about it. I've written 2 books, and continue to, wherever I am, whether it's a stage, a microphone, my Forbes column, talking about how if you treat people well, it matters. They come back. And it's an age-old human truth that in business, it's forgotten every single day. Mm-hmm. So that's my job, is to remind people how we make people feel matters, and that's how we attract what we want in life.
Well, first of all, there's no better place to kill off your dreams than New York. So you're one of many. 2, in my book, there are never enough shark metaphors. So people that listen to the show have heard way too many of them. Number 3, though, I don't even remember what number 3 was, but when I get back to the book, I told you I had found a copy of the book in a store. I was a millennial 100 years ago, but I still read books instead of reading them online. So I was glad to see the book and loved it. And, again, this is one of the focuses that I talk about a lot with my own background as well. But, you talk about some of the brands that are known for customer centric, with Amazon being a prime one. I love the references to whether or not you love them or hate them. But when you look at Amazon in particular, I know for me, at least as a customer, their CX is fantastic in that I'm able to go do something, click a couple of buttons. I got a product served up at my doorstep in 24 to 48 hours, however I want it. And that may even be sooner with the future. But when you look at why Amazon in particular, which has a lot of problems in other spaces, like all brands, it's got some baggage. How do you look at why they are sort of the poster child for being such a wonderful CX brand, and how do others sort of start marching towards that same level of customer experience?
Well, we all have the same tools. They were just able to put them together in such a compelling way that everybody was shocked.
Yeah.
But we all have the same tools. We have the same technology. We have the same access to people. Jeff spent many, many millions of dollars. I mean, he was not concerned with profits. And that's actually a big one. I got asked a question the other week after a webinar, like, what do we do about our sales culture, that we only care about profits and the sales culture is not allowing for a customer experience culture? And the truth is, the way we think about how if our companies are valuable or not has changed, because it's no longer about how much cash you have quarter to quarter. It can be about the potential of your business. So now we're talking about valuation, which I won't go too far down this road, but the idea of how do we determine if our company is profitable or doing well?
Mm-hmm.
And for many years, Jeff burned and burned and burned through capital in order to get his vision to come to life. And I think most are not willing to do that.
I'm going to kind of switch then to chapter 2. I often think about the large corporations that have teams in place. Quite often there's a lack of employee engagement, and it's not often a build with customer experience, but often for a lot of leadership, a takeover and rebuild. How do you look at customer centric culture and how to build that, or in this case, sort of rebuild it when you have new leadership come in?
Yeah, I'm glad you say the word new leadership, because from my experience, companies often hire a chief experience officer and it's their way of paying lip service to customer experience.
Yes.
Oh, we're done. Job's done. We've got somebody at the helm. But really, that person has often very little influence, very little budget, and nothing gets accomplished. So I believe that rather than leaving it up to chance and even hiring a new CEO and saying, oh, this is our turnaround CEO, it's better to have an operationalized leadership development program. So we already have a customer centric culture. We already have an employee centric culture. We hire leaders and we orient and onboard them into our way of doing business. And they go through extensive leadership training, because I tell my audiences that today we live in complicated times. We need transformational leadership. We can't just leave it to chance. So we really need to overmanage the things we care about, which is a quote from Capital One. I love that. When
Mm-hmm.
we think about culture, and leadership development strategy is an overlooked piece of customer experience. And that's from Josh Bersin, who I read an article that he wrote, and I just couldn't get enough of this idea of developing people, not simply hiring CEOs, expecting them to turn the company around in a few years, and then they move on and take another better paying CEO job.
What is the most important role to build out in leadership other than the CEO? I mean, when you start thinking about who's going to drive this down, you are correct. I mean, I completely agree with that the CX is often sort of a, just to put a face on it, but without the authority to make change. How do you push the rest of leadership into wanting to build this out for the rest of the teams that run across the company? Who's the most pivotal in this process?
Yeah, I think it might matter on the company, because companies have different titles and
Sure.
different organizational structures and org charts. But from what I've seen, when the board and the CEO are driving and care about customer experience, it
Mm-hmm.
really impacts the rest of the team. And that's why in my book, so many of my examples are founder CEOs. Like
Yeah.
even the CEO of Capital One, the bank is maybe 32 years old. I think his name is Richard Fairchild,
Mm-hmm.
but he is a founder CEO. Same with the founder of Netflix, of many of these companies, Amazon, I mean, Apple until recently, founder CEO. So I think often these founders, they're not beholden to the board. They don't care if the board is upset or they're misunderstood by shareholders. They're doing what's best for their community, their employees, and they have a vision. But often I think newer CEOs, especially in these huge companies, like they feel so much pressure.
Exactly.
And so unfortunately it's not the right culture or environment for customer experience.
How do you view, though, when you're trying to put that front face on? And I've spent a ton of time in my career in lead generation and growth, but I never did it at the sacrifice in my, thoughts. I never did it at the sacrifice of the experience of the customer. To me, customer experience was a big part of the equation to drive lead generation and sales. And I'm afraid that where we're going with the pressures only becoming, more frequent and stronger and higher, that, the expansion, if you will, of need for growth sometimes chokes the value of customer experience. However, especially as we're seeing it with online reviews and everywhere else, and all the churn that brands can run through with losing customers, it becomes a real lead generation problem when your customer experience is so bad. I mean, I can give you tons of examples where I've fired a customer and quit them also as a company because the experience is so bad. But I'm curious if you think the toothpaste is out of the tube and we're not able to push it back in, or do you think there's a way to help fix this?
I think that what is rewarded now is this humility is, when you look at reviews, at least on Yelp for me or TripAdvisor or any of these things, when I see that the company responds to a negative review and says, "Hey, I'm so sorry you had to experience
Yeah.
that. Like we addressed it with the employee." And I have such a level of respect for that humility, for that willingness to try and fix it and to engage, that for me that might even score this company higher points than if they had almost perfect reviews but left those negative reviews unanswered. So I think this, and Jay Barrett, I think you interviewed, has a
Yeah.
book, Your Haters.
One of the
And
yeah.
I love that idea of go to the fire and be humble and try and fix it. I think companies are not used to spending this kind of money on relationships, and they don't like it because it doesn't seem there's, it's not black and white. It's not we respond and we get this return on investment. And I think companies, people are still so unwilling to use their imagination and take a risk and invest in what they know is the right thing. It's just unbelievable. Like, even as a practitioner myself, as a change agent, I had a world of trouble. I was constantly trying to bug our vendors. Hey, can you help me come up with this ROI equation for customer service?
Yeah.
And they didn't want to deal with me. We didn't pay them enough for them to really spend time with me. But I was so desperate. Like, God, we got to let everyone see how important this is. But they didn't care, and it's really hard for one person, especially a mid-level executive, to try and change an entire company.
Agreed. And I just wish, as I'm thinking about this, thinking about empathy and how important it is, I wish that companies would say, "I'm sorry." That's when it's not part of a script in their response to reviews,
Oh, totally.
as opposed to, you hear "we're sorry" as some sort of script 100% of the time. I just wish that even
Well,
2% of the time it was actually meant and not an
I
automated
yeah,
response.
I agree. It's so obnoxious as a customer. It's so patronizing when you complain about something
Yeah.
and they say that they're sorry. I mean, it's just like it's worse, I think, than being aloof and not saying anything.
Agreed. Yeah. Yeah, they say it in such an order too that, "Oh yes, we hear your problem," and they want to repeat that problem back so they feel like you got an understanding. I'm like, "No, you're not hearing what my problem is in the first place." So then
And
let's go ahead.
what one last thing on this, Kenneth, they'll say your name 3 times
Oh yeah.
because it's part of their, and I put this in the book, like Capital
Yeah.
One talks about this with metrics. So the agent they're mandated to say your name, Kenneth. 3 times in the call,
Right.
but then they forget. So at the end, it's like, thank you for your time, Kenneth. Is there anything else I could do for you, Kenneth? Please let me know if there's anything.
Yeah.
It's just, it's like nobody's home. So part of the argument in the book is, we're afraid of robots, but we already treat our employees like robots, and they treat our customers like robots.
Agreed. So let's dive a little bit deeper into chapter 5, which is the customer focused marketing. I love the Ann Hamley quote at the first. She was
Oh, I love
episode
it too.
100, and she's one of my favorite marketers. But I love,
She's
she
a good
says
speaker
she's a
too.
wonderful speaker, but she says, what would your marketing look like if your customers sign your paycheck? And, in particular, I use quite a few of her quotes in my presentations as well. So I just emailed her yesterday and give her
Good.
lots of love on a lot of stuff. But how do you see the role of the CMO in the future? And moreover, since CMOs, I use this reference all the time. They change, either quicker than light bulbs or quicker than an NFL running back, with about
Mm.
a 2.5 year lifespan, often less. But how do you continue that customer centric focus when CMO leadership, which is often often responsible for your customer experience team as well, and that marketing's pervasive, you hope, throughout the company. But when that leadership changes so often, and that affects the teams that often see complete overhauls, and maybe it isn't just the marketing department, but that's what we're kind of focusing on in chapter 5. But how do you look at sustaining a good customer experience when you have such large overhauls by one single leadership role that continue, and then it can, people don't care if Capital One changes leadership every 2 years and has somebody overhaul a team. They look at a company with a 30 plus year history, and that's the brand they know.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it is a challenge with CMO turnover, like you mentioned, Kenneth. But, increasingly the CMO owns customer experience.
Yeah.
They're the only C-level executive, usually, that has their finger to the pulse of the customer, that knows what's going on with that relationship. But often they're not empowered, they're not invited to board level meetings. So I think making that CMO, empowering them and giving them actual influence would really be helpful for these companies. And yeah, if they know turnover with CMOs is a problem, maybe that's because the companies are too fixated on page views and clicks
Yeah.
and eyeballs and things that make really no sense.
New customer count instead of the ones
Right.
running out the back door.
Right. I mean, that's why my whole platform is so simple. People always say to me, "Wow, Blake, your ideas are so simple, but it's the way you say them." Because what I'm saying is not unique. But the problem is there's such a lack of common sense. Like, if we just hire CMOs to be more thoughtful, and that's my word of the year, is thoughtfulness, because there's a lack of thoughtfulness in business. And tomorrow's leaders need to be thoughtful, to be considerate, to think about things other than what's simply in front of them. Because in the book, I also talk a lot about the cultural zeitgeist of the moment. And in that marketing chapter, we also look at the younger generations and what they want. They want companies that focus on sustainability, on social issues, because Edelman Trust Barometer shows that trust in the government is at an all-time low. And actually, employees really trust their employers. They want their employers to take a stance on issues. And whether you like that or not, that's what the research from the Trust Barometer is telling us, that people are looking for leadership and they're not always getting it from the places they had in the past. So now employers have to have this social, environmental, and even sometimes, I know some of you are probably really uncomfortable by this, but even political direction, where young people expect their companies to take a stance on social issues, whether we like it or not. That this is what the
Oh yeah.
research is saying about Gen Z. I'm not Gen Z,
Oh, you're
but
not? I thought you were. Well, I mean, everybody's dreaming of the possibility of either Nancy Pelosi or Donald Trump becoming their CEO at some point and make your company great like it never was.
I didn't say that.
No,
You
I'm
said
kidding. I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I was waiting for you to do religion or politics, and you went politics, so it was perfect. No, I'm just kidding,
Well,
but
it's not even me, it's the research. It's this adult
absolutely
stress barometer 2019. I mean, I was even shocked to read this. Like, wow, like employees really want their companies to take these stances, but with social media, everything
agreed,
is out in the open. It's a totally different world than when we were growing up,
totally.
completely.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Mark Zuckerberg.
Right.
Chapter 6. So I'm going to give you an example. I want to talk about your guidance on experience in technology. And one of the things that I often rant about in conference presentations with how CX has been bad is how the technology seems so disconnected from a lot of the different teams working with it. And really, a lot of the people don't know where that disconnect is with the customers, and the people that are manning the tech and the automation are just really blowing a bad experience into a worse experience. Give you an example. Uh, I had a brand that represented me for a service that they provided. It was so horribly bad on a biblical scale that it came down to a few rants and screams over the phone that said, never call me again. After 3 or 4 phone calls, I threatened a lawsuit because they didn't take me off their, do not call list. And they finally did. And then after I told them I never wanted to hear from them, didn't want any emails, didn't want any phone calls, didn't want any direct mail, just I'm never going to work with you again. Then I get started bombarding with an email campaign like I was a brand new person who had never had any exposure with them, and I had just come out of the worst relationship I could have with a possible brand. And if I said them out loud, most people would understand and why. But when I thought about it with technology, this is one of the problems where one team is not talking to another, and it just is a reinforcement of a negative point of view. And so much of the technology that we're investing in as part of our martech stacks often seems to completely blow it for the customer. That's just one bad example, but I'd love to know what kind of guidance you give on technology and the customer experience as a whole.
I think the problem starts at the top. There's a quote that another fish,
Thank you.
it's an analogy or metaphor, that the fish rots at the head.
Yeah.
I don't know about the shark. Well, anyway, we'll put that in the show notes. Never mind. That's disgusting. Okay, the point is
You've
that
hosted a podcast way too long when you say you're going to put it in the show notes and it's my podcast. So I got it.
no, and you know what's the worst is I always forget, and I'm just such a flake. It's like I say, "Oh, I'm gonna put this in the show notes,"
Yeah.
and then I don't, and then I feel guilty later when I realize. But it's like already too late. It's been weeks
No,
anyway.
I agree. I chalk it up to my ADD. So go ahead.
Yeah, and I have pregnancy brain. Okay, fish rots from the top, and what I found when I interviewed good companies and CTOs from good companies is that they really were listeners first. They would sit with the other business units, like the CTO of Sephora. His first 6 months on the job, all he did was go and sit and listen to the needs of the other business groups. And I think often you have these CTOs that come in or CIOs and it's a thou shalt follow attitude. And that's a problem because if you don't understand the needs of the business and your colleagues, how are you going to you're providing a very disjointed experience to your colleagues and to your customers. So often, in the book we talk about organizational structure where our companies, our technologies are so siloed that it's almost like different
Yes.
skyscrapers. And Jamie Goodfriend, the CXO of Hasbro, she gave me this idea in a podcast I did with her where she said, it's like marketing groups in a company. You have customer marketing, you have product marketing, you might have market research, all on different skyscrapers. They do not share information. And then, of course, the customer comes along. She's an e commerce customer. She expects a seamless, zero friction experience, and she's not getting it, of course, because inside there's no seamless experience. So I think the problem often starts at the top with these decisions that are made. And that's where digital transformation comes in, where I'm not a technology expert, but I have done research where it's the middleware, it's the integration
Right.
across systems. And I talk to experts because I'm not one on tech, but I understand that now this glue that's connecting all these pieces are more important than ever because the customer's feeling exactly what you described, where you got hit from multiple directions and then you're so fed up and then they have the gall to do it again. I mean, we all experience this every single day.
Couldn't agree with you more on that. And a big problem I think that we're going to have go forward is that there are so many bots, so much automation coming that if people don't start getting a hold of the technology today, there are rampant instances I hear from people all the time where it's, for lack of a better phrase, killing the CX. This is something that technologists have really got to get behind to help support a company go forward. So, chapter 10, data. You talk about data being a big potential blow up for CX with companies, and I just looked at Disney's launch for their streaming service. You get all of that amazing hype that makes a national news story. As a whole, they've always been known as a pretty good customer experience, if you will. It's, think all the way to Disney World and Disneyland, but then you blow it with a data hack, whether you contribute that to the loss of Disney or the hacker, with customers that still put the blame on you. We're seeing this with companies all over. It seems like every day somebody else is getting hacked. When you're talking to people about data, how much are you emphasizing this as such a juggernaut or not, as a part of the puzzle for customer experience today?
Well, the fact is that most customers don't feel comfortable with their data being auto collected. They don't trust companies today. And most of us don't even read terms and conditions when we
Exactly.
sign them. And
12 pages
companies,
long.
right, make it so hard. And it's just there's so much nonsense in this whole exchange between the customer
Yeah.
and the legal team of the company that I think for the companies that just make it simple for the customer, that try to make the customer's life easier and better in an age where none of us really feel safe. I mean, I had my identity stolen really badly by a Bitcoin company out of, it was either India or England. I couldn't really tell, but they stole my identity for months and there was nothing I could do. And it was terrible. They were using my pictures, my actual name, fake Facebook page about me. It was awful. But it's just a reminder that we are all vulnerable. So we can be as safe as we can, but we also need companies to be responsible, to have codes of ethics when it comes to AI, when it comes to data. And we can't wait for the government to regulate these companies to say, hey, how are you abusing customers? We need companies to think, well, how would I want my data handled or my family's, and be thoughtful. So I think, yeah, you're right that the data question is really a big one for companies and they need to take it seriously. But yeah, every single day we're hearing about hacks. It's really scary.
Sort of define, if you will, as best you can, what the customer of the future is.
The customer of the future is already here. She expects life to be made easier for her. So many companies still make life harder on the customer to make it easier on their own brand, their processes, the way they've always done things. And the customer today is getting more from the self service you described with Amazon or Spotify music playlists or the ease of using something like Netflix streaming, Apple products. And then she goes to deal with her cable company, insurance, telecom provider, even governmental organization, and the experience is disjointed, it is clunky, it is hard. And so you're seeing this major gap. So the customer of the future, who is she? She is expecting zero friction, seamless experiences. She's expecting companies that are thoughtful about her individual personalized life, and they are using technology in a human way that makes her life easier and better. And that's really the name of the game, is that the modern company, the company of the future, makes the customer's life easier and better. They are thoughtful. And my last point about not the customer, but the company, is that the company of the future has a soul. They have a soul in how they do business, how their business processes impact the community around them, and that's really, I think, a very exciting topic, the company of the future, and how the company of the future has to have a soul and be thoughtful. I had a quote recently. I mean, it sounds so obnoxious quoting myself, but I God, pregnancy brain. But really, the point is that I think the best thing a company can do is hire sensitive, thoughtful, empathetic people who really care about what life is like for other people, who are not narcissists, who don't only care about their bonuses, that are incredibly thoughtful, hardworking, humble, and that will impact the culture and create the company of the future.
And to note, the customer of the future is now a she.
Well, I'm a she, so
No, you're
everything I write comes from
no, good for
my
you.
own.
So, if you had to look at the relationship that a lot of companies have with third party agencies and vendors, is this something that comes up a lot? I specifically think of, marketing agencies that fill in the gaps for a lot of the marketing teams, for a lot of the customer service teams as well that are third partied. Has that been something you've seen or noticed anything substantial in your research, your career history, things that comes up as a good thing or as a bad thing for brands today working with so many agencies?
I think it could be good or bad depending on how you manage it. They say you should overmanage the things you care about, which we talked about earlier. So that
Yeah.
can be your contact center provider. Of course, if you're, third parties, what happened during some of the hurricanes for insurance companies is they outsourced the call center work because they couldn't handle the volume they were getting of people trying to figure out what their insurance policies were for their homes. And insurance satisfaction at that time was at an all-time low because these companies
Hmm.
outsourced their most important relationships,
Exactly.
and of course it wasn't handled well. So I think you have to be very careful. There are very good third-party companies, outsourced contact center providers that do a great job. The relationship is tightly managed by the brand. Things go well, but that can also go the other way when companies don't want to deal with it and they don't really manage that third party very well.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. There's so much of this kind of stuff that was outsourced for years. And then when it gets so bad, you finally get a focus on it, and people like you that are thought leaders in this space that are, pointing people back in the right direction. So, well, Blake, we've had plenty of shark metaphors, and there are a few great whites that I've had the chance to dive with off outside the Golden Gate out on the West Coast. But I'd love to know, since you're on a shark's perspective, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
I have to say I don't know that many types of sharks. I know great white, I know hammerhead. I know there's also
And
sharks
you have a
that don't.
3-year old, so you know baby shark.
Oh my god, I hate that song. I know that song. They performed it. Oh my God. My daughter was like 2.5. They performed it on the stage, but all the kids just froze. So we were all just in the audience watching them stand like deer in the headlights with the shark
Oh,
music.
sure.
Be shark dude. My favorite type of shark is the one that's not going to eat me. That is kind, even though he could probably eat me, but I'm not interesting for him, and we can be friends.
Okay. Well, Blake, it's that special time of the show for me. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions you're going to be asked today?
Okay, sure.
All right. Number 1, Amazon or Sephora?
Oh, these are like tailored
Yeah.
to
Well,
me, rapid
yeah, I've
fire.
read the book, so.
Yeah. I would say Amazon is the shark that has made the biggest impact. I think just from an impact perspective, you can't avoid Amazon. Sephora, I mean, they do a great job, but it's not impacting at the scale that Amazon is right now.
True. And you'll just buy your Sephora makeup on Amazon at some point anyway. So,
They pulled it off, but yeah.
yeah. Number 2, and I've listened to a previous show, so you'll get why I know this one. Chess or checkers?
Oh my God, I have to say chess. My husband's really into
Yeah.
chess, so
Yeah, I heard. Number 3, customer is always right or customer is not always right?
customers not always right. Customers can be jerks.
Wow, that's good. And thank God you said that. So, number 4, Southern California or Northern California?
Oh, definitely northern. I
Ooh,
love my cool weather and good food and good wine up here. So for sure, Northern.
Yeah. Well, San Francisco is going through some changes, but it's very hard to get used to, 40-degree weather in August during their crazy summers. So, number
Yeah.
5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today, this is a good Cracker Barrel customer experience question, is biscuits or cornbread?
Oh, I like cornbread. I haven't eaten like a ton of biscuits. My mom lives in Savannah, Georgia, so
Oh, there you go.
maybe she would answer this better than me, but I do like cornbread.
So, Blake, where can people find out more about you, grab a copy of the book, find out about your thought leadership and the podcast and more?
Yeah, I would love for your audience to connect with me. You can visit me at blakemichellmorgan.com, send me a note. I always love hearing from anybody who says, here's something that resonates with them. So, or something that doesn't resonate.
Yeah,
I like arguing as well. That is fun for me.
good. So, Blake, thank you so much again for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thanks, Kenneth.
So there was my conversation with Blake Morgan, a customer experience futurist, a keynote speaker, and the author of 2 books, including The Customer of the Future, 10 Guiding Principles for Winning Tomorrow's Business. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from a conversation with her. First, do you have access to what it takes for you to create the kind of experience that customers will remember in a good way and that consumers will want to become new customers? Yeah, there's nothing special that any company has that another does not. There may be some proprietary technology that some of them have built, but you can do that same thing or buy well-known and respected technology products that can help you. Other than that, what is it? I mean, I love what Blake said when we talked about how Amazon is so respected, how we've anointed them to this high level, if you will, with the best in quote status. She said, and I quote, "We all have the same tools. They were just able to put them in such a compelling way that everybody was shocked." That is so very, very true. We all have the same access to tools and technology, the people to hire in the marketplace, office space and staplers. I mean, there's not a special laptop at one company versus another that gives that company a better CX than another. But what you've ultimately got to ask yourself is this: is your company willing to do that? To develop that mindset and culture, to focus on your customers first and give them the best experience. Otherwise, they'll take their dollars elsewhere. Second, think about what so often happens to customer experience with leadership change. Most companies will bring in new leadership, and guess what they do? They shuffle the people and pieces beneath them. My point is that they often inherit a rebuild instead of a build, and that has problems that it brings. What Blake was so aptly pointing out is that true leaders that stay with companies, the CEO founders, stay vested in the service of their brands. And it's similar when you think about it with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are 100% vested in the service that every customer gets. And at some point, though, that shift occurs as they grow, and it's rarely to never good. Remember, your customers don't care at all about the sausage making process behind any brand logo. If Jeff Bezos took his $1 trillion and went to the beach and bought an island or 2, which is what I would do, then would you expect any less from Amazon's level of service? For most brands that provide you amazing service, again, she brought up an example like Sephora, would you have any clue who the CEO, CMO, or CXO of the brand is? No. And CX is such a huge driver of growth in lead gen and sales and back-end churn, and it's getting more and more important as the world gets smaller and smaller, and that's somewhat of a result by simply being more transparent from company to consumer. Stop focusing so much on page views and clicks and more on your customers' problems. Third, one of your biggest problems to me as well with CX is technology and data. So many people think about the collection of data and how it's used to give these great personalized experiences throughout the journey. And that's a fair way to think about it. What often stands out more, though, because we see it so often, is how systems don't connect and how bad the data is used and even protected. If you want to improve your customer experience, and not just between one department team and another, then you really need to think about whether or not the systems customers are using to talk to you are talking to each other. Remember that they have a fairly single opinion of you and should not have messaging pointing them in various directions. For example, I brought up one from my personal experience. If you fire a company who provides you a product or service, and you're having to yell at them to never call you or email you or direct mail you again, and then they start sending you dopey "we love you and miss you" emails over and over and over just because marketing had one system and customer support had another system, then that's a problem. Or billing sends you different bills in different ways that were explained by sales. That's a problem. All of this is a technology alignment issue that can destroy your brand's CX. Customer experience is not a channel. It should be an alignment of all the touch points. And if you get a data breach for not protecting data across these systems, then shame on you, and everyone should stop working with you because you did not protect their precious data, even though you buried loopholes written by your attorney on page 12 of a terms and conditions doc that no one should have to agree to or read just to use your product or service. Companies need to take the data question much, much more seriously. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. You want to bring in the customers of the future? Then be a customer-focused and customer experience shark and join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.